Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to my next video. I'm going to be reviewing the Percy Jackson show. To be frank, I thought it was pretty bad, and I'll get into that very quickly. First, I'm going to have a spoiler-free review, and then I'll get into the spoiler stuff in the later half of this video. So, my review of this Percy Jackson and the Olympians show that came out is, overall, it is mediocre as a show in general, and pretty abysmal as an adaptation. Most of the characters have been watered down, it feels like, from the original book. The main trio is especially noticeable, where instead of each character out of Grover, Annabeth, and Percy having distinct personalities, they kind of have just made them all just your general main characters, and they lose the charm that they had so strongly in the original book. The gods and many of the enemies and generally just all the characters in the show feel like worse versions of themselves from the books, and it's just not that good. I had so many questions throughout the show of, they changed this thing, how are they going to make that work off in later seasons, later books from the series that they're going to adapt? Because several characters that have an original character in the first book that are later developed, where at face value they seem very bad and you dislike them, later you grow to actually like them and love them even, because they have such interesting motivations and they're also human and relatable. But in the show, all these characters just seem like they serve some kind of just general stereotype show purpose. One character is just the annoying person who's weird. One character is just the evil authority figure. One person is just the loving dad. I mean, they just feel like instead of having the original nuance and depth to their characters they had in the series, they've just been, like I said, watered down to this generic show character templates without any real depth to their character. Another thing they did is they tried to make it more, they tried to add in themes that were present in the book, but the series, Percy Jackson, is not about themes. It's not about some kind of dilemma of whether we should trust the gods or not, whether we should let the Titans win. It's ultimately about the characters, not the themes. And that was something that I felt the show did wrong. It seemed to focus more on the themes instead of the characters. Instead of the characters getting lots of development and lots of actions and things that showed who their character was, in the original book, there are several encounters or just events that happen throughout the first book where they fight different monsters or people. And in the book, every single one is enjoyable and suspenseful and action-packed, and it's interesting as they're taking down these enemies while also learning more about them and the Greek mythology. In the show, however, anytime we come across an enemy or any opposing force, instead of there being really any action, what seems to happen is, instead of the original action that's present in the book, we just end up having this very boring and talk through between the protagonist and the enemy. Now, there were certainly times in the books where Percy and like the monster he's about to fight or the enemy he's about to fight are talking with each other, but it's nowhere near this level of in the show where every single enemy they face, like 10 or even 20 minutes before they actually start fighting, there's just this long, oh, my motivations are this and the gods are bad because this, and then Percy, Grover, Annabeth being like, oh no, but not this, and then they just talk back and forth for a long time, and to me it just feels like they were trying to like mature Percy Jackson. They were trying to give it this more morally gray aspect to it when the original series isn't really like that. Also, I cannot stress how badly they did Percy's character. A lot of the pleasure for me of reading the Percy Jackson series is how likable and cool of a character Percy is himself. He's one of my favorite protagonists or main characters that I've ever read. He is kind of an average Joe, And yet, at the same time, he has this quirky, sarcastic, kind of quippy attitude about him. He actually reminds me of Spider-Man in that regard, where he's kind of just your average teenage dude who's like relatable and wants to get the girl and has a friend and blah, nah, nah, nah. But also is just kind of the cooler version of that, where they make sassy remarks as they're fighting the bad guys and such. In the show, however, Percy is a very angsty, very downcast, very angry teenager who is just constantly feels like he's yelling at someone or glaring at someone and is just full of angst and rage. I actually counted the amount of times that Percy smiled, because even from the first episode, it was so glaringly obvious to me that he was so, like, serious and angry all the time. So, Percy smiles 9 times throughout the entirety of the whole show, and half of those are in the last episode, as you would expect, because that's when he's happy, you know. But 9 times, and half of those, 4 to be exact, were in the last episode. I would be fine with this if Percy Jackson was a grimdark anti-hero story about this angsty, rage-filled character who struggles to make choices and is doing morally gray things. But Percy Jackson isn't that story. And Percy himself, in the books, I would expect him, if this was a true adaptation, to be smiling multiple times every episode, as he makes sarcastic remarks a lot, and he's pretty funny, and I expect he grins when he says that, but in the show, there's nothing. There were also so many parts where they traded scenes in the book where Percy or Annabeth or Grover did smart things and used their environment to their advantage, or figured out something new, or just something of import to the plot happened in the books in a scene. And in that scene in the show, instead, they replace it with a dramatic sequence that's just cool for a show. Overall, I would say that at worst, this show is laughable. I wasn't out loud laughing, but I was close to it at certain parts and certain shots. And other parts, it's actually pretty decent. There were some choices that I liked, and at best, they were just some good characters that I liked and some good moments that I liked that I thought were good. Overall, I would give the Percy Jackson show a 4 out of 10, which is pretty harsh. I would say as an adaptation, it's absolute garbage, and to me, what it feels like is instead of someone actually reading the book, to me, it seems like someone just saw the major plot points of the first book and then reconstructed their own story with most of those same plot points, instead of actually capturing the vibe and the characterization that exists in the actual book. I wouldn't really recommend this show to anyone, even people who really love the Percy Jackson series like I do. However, don't let that stop you, and if you want to check out the show, do. I think one way for you to know if you want to watch this show is watch the first episode or 2, and if you like it by then keep watching. If you don't, the quality never really goes up, so if you don't enjoy the first few episodes, drop it and don't continue, I would recommend. Okay, that is the end of the spoiler-free section of this video. Now I will be getting into spoilers. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Okay, you've been warned. I have my notes here, and I'm going to read through them and comment on the things I thought were interesting or didn't make sense or I liked about the show, which there were a few things, and they might be out of order, so pardon that. Okay, so first I'm going to go over the things I liked, as it is a much shorter list. First of all, the moment when Percy is going around the bathrooms and then Clarice and her friends jump him and, do the thing with in the bathrooms. During that part, when Percy said, "Hey guys, can't sleep," that showed to me some of his actual character from the book of being sarcastic and funny, and that was one of the times where he actually grinned. Now, in the show, I think they might have been doing this as him just being stupid, or maybe they were intending it to be sarcastic as he would have been in the books. I don't know, but either way, this is for me, as I interpreted it, sense of his actual sarcastic humor that I liked. But this was the only time I really felt like I saw the actual character of Percy from the book. Next is when they were doing Capture the Flag, there was one bridge, like a rope bridge they went across that had some different colored streamers on it, and there was a shot of it that just really felt to me like, oh, that seems like Camp Half-Blood. You know, there were kids in their jeans and their armor just marching across this bridge that really does look like it's a camp for teenagers, and so that really captured the actual vibe of the books for me, and I really liked that shot. Another thing that I liked was Ares' motorcycle. When Ares was on his motorcycle, it definitely was how I pictured it in the books, where he's just kind of a biker at the beginning. There were some later things with his character that I didn't necessarily love, but the beginning where he was just on the motorcycle, just the design of his outfit and on the motorcycle seemed very accurate to the books, and I liked it because it gave off the vibe that I was expecting. The last thing that I liked that was probably the best thing out of the show, Luke's character was actually the best character in the show. I think they nailed his mentality, and although they certainly changed things about him, I felt overall he was both a good adaptation from the source material and an interesting and engaging character. There were a few things about him that were weird, but that's to be expected from this show that was mediocre in quality. But if overall the whole show had been on the quality level of Luke's character, I felt that this would have been a worthy adaptation and one that deserves to exist, and I would have enjoyed greatly if the whole show had been up to the quality of Luke's character. Now we'll get into all the things I don't like. Okay, so about Ares' character. I liked his character overall. I think he was actually one of the better gods in how they portrayed him from the book, adapted him. But it was kind of off-putting to me that he was playing mind games at the beginning when he was talking with the trio, because Ares is stupid. It's part of his character. Why is he manipulating them? Now, even in the book, he does manipulate them to some extent, but the only manipulation he does is threatening to kill them if they don't get a shield for him, and then giving them a backpack that is loaded. In the show, however, he has several conversations where he seems to be playing mind games and tricks and manipulating the trio, which was a little strange to me. The design of a lot of the monsters was bad, and I felt like they looked a little bit too much like generic CGI monsters. Like the Chimera didn't really look like a Chimera, it had scaly texture all along its body, and that really just made it not look like a creature from mythology, but just like a generic CGI monster. Same thing with the Furies. The Furies were actually one of the better monsters, in that they are kind of supposed to be scaly with wings and such, but even their appearance was just a little too fake looking for me, if that makes sense. Another thing is I was surprised that they included Grover's mom at all, because she's not relevant and it makes no sense for her to exist and she wasn't in the books. But why is Grover's mom a dryad made out of actual wood? In the books and just in Greek mythology and all interpretations of dryads that I have seen of in most places, they're tree spirits. They're not actual trees. In the books, it describes the dryads as having like a kind of elfin look about them. And it says that Juniper, Grover's girlfriend, when she cries, there's little like chlorophyll. They're kind of green tinted and such. But they were not just trees. And it was also another example of bad CGI that doesn't look good. Another thing is, there were 2 or 3 instances where Grover and Annabeth said sarcastic remarks, and I really felt like if the writers knew what they were doing, they would have given those remarks to Percy, as that's his character in the books. He's the funny, kind of stupid, but also brave and heartfelt one. One example of this is when they're going into the amusement park and Percy's trapped, and Percy asks, why did Hephaestus build an amusement park? And Annabeth says, maybe he finds them amusing. Now, I feel like if that had been Percy's quote, that would have matched his character to a T, as that is exactly something that I could picture him saying in the books. But Annabeth saying it just seems strangely off-putting, and then, of course, we have Percy just being super pissed off that she said that, and he's just very angry as he is. Another thing that was very off-putting to me is, in the books, Grover is very nervous and shy, and he's not that good with people. In the show, however, he is the most confident of the trio. He takes action, it feels like, more than Percy does, and this was really strange to me. Grover's character wasn't necessarily bad. I actually thought he wasn't too bad. He was just kind of mediocre, as the whole show was, but he wasn't bad like Percy. However, if we're going from the books, I think his character was the most different. I just want to repeat, because this is the section where I'm going over the trio, that it was astonishing to me how serious and angry and not funny Percy was. He wasn't a very likable character at all, and he just seemed like he got annoyed and yelled at people whenever he interacted with people. Another thing is, this is slightly accurate to the book, but they overdid it a bit. Annabeth is really mean in the first half of the show. In the second half, she becomes more a part of their group and she is much nicer. But the beginning half, she's very mean. I don't know if this was a writing problem or a directing problem or an acting problem, but she just comes off as very mean and unlikable, and I didn't really like that. In the books, she is kind of antagonistic towards Percy, but not that much, and it isn't like a huge part of her character, where in this series, it was purposely mentioned by Percy that the one person who wouldn't be afraid to sacrifice him for the good of the mission would be Annabeth, which that's just an example of like how antagonistic she is towards him towards the beginning. Okay, I'm going to go off on a little tangent about a particular scene in the show versus the book and why it was so much better in the book. So in the book, they go to Waterland, or whatever it's called, and then they go through like the Tunnel Ride of Love. But before that, there's a scene where they find the shield, and then like Annabeth picks it up, blah, 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 and there's like the thing that traps them. But then there's a bunch of spiders, and Annabeth is severely afraid of spiders, and she really freaks out when they start like scurrying about. They're just like metal spiders. They're not real spiders. And then Percy kind of comforts her, and he's like, oh no, it's good. Because in the first book, Annabeth is very much the more competent, superior one who's just better at doing stuff and getting stuff done. However, in this instance, we get a glimpse, just a glimpse, of how Percy is better in some situations, and Annabeth isn't just the best at everything. There's some instances where Percy could help her, and that's how the trio works, is they all kind of overlap and they work together. It also humanizes Annabeth because she's not just this perfect person who can do everything. She does have legitimate fears and weaknesses. I'd like to really emphasize, because watching this show made me realize how good the actual first book, The Lightning Thief, is, because the trio especially is a phenomenal trio and work really great as characters together. Better even than Harry, Ron, and Hermione from Harry Potter, in my opinion, because they work so well together. Percy is the brave one, but he can be foolhardy and he can run into situations and he can kind of make bad decisions. Annabeth is the smart one, right? But sometimes she can be afraid, or sometimes she can overthink things. Grover is compassionate, and he's also very instinctual. Oftentimes, he has the right instincts. However, he's very nervous, and he's not that confident with himself and standing up to people. So because of this, in lots of different scenarios throughout the first book, it's shown that, in this scenario, Percy is able to take charge and lead the trio because he excels in this area and his particular character traits help them through this scenario. Then in the next scenario, Grover is the one who helps them through the scenario because his character traits work for this thing, and then another scene with Annabeth where her character traits help them get through this problem. And so on and so forth, multiple times throughout all the different things. And then at some parts, their character traits work together to beat the bad guy or solve the problem. And because of this, it has both, it gives characterization of who the character is by how they do this, and shows how well the trio works together and why they fit together and why they work so well together as a team. Another weird thing was, in the show, they made Percy even less competent than he is in the first book. And in the first book, Percy is by no means a skilled warrior. He essentially just kind of cheeses Ares in their fight because he just kind of like, cheeses him, and then he doesn't even really defeat him. It's like Kronos telling Ares to stop killing him. And then when he's fighting Echidna, he literally just loses, and then he's not shown to be very competent. But in this series, this show series, he's even less competent and seems very weak, and then he isn't good at anything, and he's also stupider. Usually in movies and stuff, they kind of make the characters more overpowered and such to like deal with stuff easier, but in the show he was just weaker, and it puzzled me. Now I'm going to go over two of the gods, because the gods in general are a highlight of the original Percy Jackson series, because none of them are perfect. They're all deeply flawed individuals, and you can see how their bad decisions have led towards the events of this, and yet you empathize with nearly all of them. There are some exceptions, like Ares, who's kind of just bloodthirsty and stuff. But almost every single Olympian god is given motivations and desires, and they usually love their children, and they have conflicts with the other gods, and they have these rules that prevent them from doing what they truly want. And even though you don't necessarily think all of them are good, none of them are 100% good, you relate deeply to all of them. Like, I really love a lot of the gods. But in the show, they're just kind of these generic tropes that are just thrown around. This god, he'll be the funny, annoying one. This god, he's also going to be the funny, annoying one. This one, he's going to be a good guy. This one's also going to be a good guy. It felt like they lost all the nuance from the original series, because especially in the first book, with every single god we meet, we doubt whether they're good or evil. Even Poseidon, who is Percy's father, he gives him the 3 pearls, right? And we're wondering, why did he do that? Why didn't he give an extra pearl for his mother? And we're doubting all the gods' intentions and stuff. In this show series, though, they're basically good gods and they're bad gods, and that's how it is. So, 2 of the gods that I really love from the series, that have great characters that I love a lot, were done very bad and got the short end of the stick in this show. Hephaestus was one of these. In the book, Hephaestus is this crippled, ugly, kind of world-weary, he's a bitter man who resents his family, his mother, and people in general because all they've ever done is hurt him. And he just wants to be alone with his works and his creations and just have that. And he's such a relatable character because even though he's like rude and mean to our main characters, he explains to them his motivations and he's very relatable. But in the show, he's good looking and he's very like soft spoken and he only uses a cane. Whereas in the book, he was crippled, he had like scars all over his face, his beard was burned, and then like he's like crippled where like one of his arms is in like a little brace thing. And that's part of his character. Part of his character is his physical appearance. He's also very rude to the characters because he is not good at talking to people. That's part of his character also. However, in this show, he just is very nice and just a good guy, and there's no depth to his character, and he's just like the kind old man who comes along and is like, oh, I'm sorry, so I hurt your friend? Okay, well, I'll let him go. Yes, you're right, don't be bad. Dionysus is another character I felt like they did dirty. He is actually slightly entertaining in the show because he is funny, which is something that does exist in the books, is he is funny. However, in the books, he's not trying to be funny. The reason he's funny is because he's so antagonistic and purposefully being annoying to everyone around him because he's, again, a bitter character who is bitter at everyone around him. And most importantly, he's an apathetic character. He has this prohibition where he can't drink alcohol, and he can't see his wife. He can't go back to Olympus, and he's stuck here with all these kids that he hates, and he just is forced to stay there, and so he hates his existence, and he's just trying to pass the time, and then all these annoying kids are bothering him. And even though you're like, oh, why don't you just help our main characters? He is also another very relatable character. However, in the show, he's just kind of this quirky, perky, he's very perky, and like upbeat character, which didn't match his apathetic nature, where he's always Peter Johnson instead of Peter Johnson. You know, you see what I mean? Another thing is, during the scene with Hephaestus, they added in a fake death. They added in a death fake out with Percy. Why? You didn't need to do that. It wasn't in the book. You have no duty to do that. And everyone hates fake out deaths. And we knew Percy was not going to die because he's the freaking main character that the series is named off of. And there are like 4 other books. Why'd you do that? Okay, now another thing that was just bothering me is, why does telekinesis exist? Percy pushes Nancy Boba Fett into the fountain with telekinesis. I may have just missed it, but I watched that clip 2 or 3 times, and I watched it pretty closely, and I could not see any water grabbing her. He just used telekinesis to shove her into the fountain. Now, Percy Jackson doesn't really have a hard magic system, but the whole thing that makes it interesting is that each god and each demigod by association has their own kind of sphere of powers that they can work within, that their powers are all themed about. What does telekinesis have to do with the sea? Another instance of telekinesis is when they're on the St. Louis Arch, Echidna just freaking uses telekinesis to bump open the arch. Instead of like the book where, you know, the arch just gets busted open because they're freaking fighting in there. There's a giant chimera that can spit acid and fire. She just like waves her hand and then the St. Louis Arch just has a huge gaping hole in the middle. Who's like, why can't she just whant Percy and just smash him to pulp with her telekinesis? This is just so stupid. Another thing is, why is there a flashback of Percy as a kid and he's scared of swimming? Like, they're doing swim lessons and he's scared of it. He's Poseidon's son. He's supposed to be naturally gifted at swimming, and he shouldn't be afraid of swimming. Now, in Heroes of Olympus, there is one thing where he's, like, drowning in poison, so then he has a little bit of fear of swimming after that. But that's for an understandable reason. But before that, he is not afraid of water at all. And he's very good at swimming because he's a son of Poseidon. Another thing that felt like just a lame trying to like add in the spice, but you're just watering the original down and making it worse, is they added Clarice in as a red herring. Like, oh, she's the one who did it, she's the bad guy, for like the entire show. And then the last episode, you find out, oh no, it was Luke, Clarice, she wasn't the bad guy the whole time. And it didn't have any impact on the plot, and it just was so stupid. And why did you do this? Another thing that was very weird is Kronos has a freaking body in Percy's dreams. I mean, this was one of the parts where I was literally almost laughing. Because Kronos, first of all, it doesn't make sense why Kronos would have a body. That's the whole thing, is that he's like reforming his body in the sarcophagus in the second book, right? He doesn't have a body. He's sliced up into bits, as characters mentioned in this show. Why then, when he appears in Percy's dream, is he like this spectral figure? He's like this weird, creepy skeleton. That's not what Titans look like. They're not skeletons. They're giant, glowing, like, super strong people. They're gods, essentially. And just all these dreams with Kronos were just hilarious in a kind of not funny way and a kind of funny way. Because just everything, like the creepy ghost thing that's like with the lantern that's going in the mist, towards like the voice, it really felt like they were just purposefully trying to make the show mediocre with just putting in generic like fantasy trope things in there that didn't exist in the original, like this creepy hooded figure with this horse voice when that didn't exist in the books, and it just makes it worse because it just takes me out of it. The voice especially is just so funny, and it gets me every time. Oh. Okay, Another question, why is Lin-Manuel Miranda Hermes? Why? I thought the part where Percy says, I don't think that's safe, then Grover, I gave them a satyr's blessing, then Percy, I was talking about the people, that was actually funny. I forgot to mention that before, but that part was actually funny too. One thing that was so weird, mind-boggling, another thing that was bad is that they revealed Luke's whole backstory in this first season, which really takes a lot away because the whole series is interesting because in Percy Jackson, part of the development is that in the beginning, everything seems kind of black and white and simple, and then later, throughout the book series, every single character gets a motivation and you relate to every single character and every single character is relatable. But in the first book, it's just, oh, they're the bad guys and they're the good guys. Poseidon is my dad, so he's good. Even though there are some doubts about stuff, it's mostly like you think they're black and white, even though there are obvious hints that they're not. But then they reveal Luke's backstory to make him more relatable, but it just ruins so many things that happen later in the series. Another strange thing for me was, why do they keep splitting up the trio and having Grover alone and spending a bunch of time and shots on him? Like when he was talking with Ares, and then there were a few other examples too. The Lotus Casino. It felt like they totally misunderstood the way the Lotus Casino works. They may have done this on purpose, but to me it feels like they just misunderstood the way it works in the book. Because in the book, you just lose track of time, and time passes super fast, and you like stay the same age, and you don't notice how much time has passed. In this show, you start losing your memory without even eating the lotus flowers, and they explained like, oh, they're pumping it in the air now, but it just felt weird and unnecessary. Why is Clarice way meaner in the show? Instead of just initiating him in like the toilet scenario and then getting revenge on him because he humiliated her, she wants to make him say he lied about the monster that killed his mom. This is another thing where I'm doubting, how are you going to make her relatable with the motivation she has in the books later on? If you make further seasons of the show, how are you going to make us like her as a character later when she's so mean? And that's not how mean she is in the book. Also, the part where Percy breaks her spear and then she goes, no, and screams and is really pathetic, that takes me out of the show so much. Like, that just seems like bad acting and bad writing and bad directing and just horrible. Why does that exist? In the book, I'm pretty sure she says, you broke my spear, you punk. And that, like, shows her character, and she's, like, really mad and pissed at him, but she doesn't go, nah. One of these has clearly better characterization. In this show, Smelly Gabe is just an annoying dad stereotype with like, don't you walk away from me. Hey, I'm talking to you. Not while you're under my roof, like just quoting just like annoying dad stereotype things to say. Where in the books, he is an abusive husband who hits his wife, Sally. And that is such a different thing that actually makes the show feel less mature than the books, because they're not willing to face head on the issue of Smelly Gabe and how truly horrible he is in the book, whereas in this movie he was just kind of annoying and pathetic. In fact, even in his exchange with Sally where she's like, oh no, Percy's doing this, we're leaving, instead of like her having to kind of cajole him and be like, I'll make bean dip for you, she is dominating him and she's like, did you give me a please? And he's like, oh, please. And then, like, they do that. She's dominating the relationship. She's the one in power. She's the one who is, like, in power in the relationship. And that works in this show because of the way their characters are set up. But it's so much more impactful in the books where he has the power because he is a man and he is stronger than her and he hits her. And it's a horrible thing and you hate his character. But in the show, it just kind of flinched away from that and didn't want to face it head on and just made Sally like the leader. Another thing they added in that was just generic, cool things that, like trope things that, is they did, the deadline elapsed. What was the point of that? And then like, oh, they're going to war anyway. Oh, but then like Poseidon just surrenders, so like, no. There was no point for that. It was another thing where they're just trying to make it feel like a generic, tropey show. This really bothered me, but why did they say Procrustes? Why did Walker Scobell say Procrustes? It's Procrustes, man. Like, what? This is Greek. That's the way it works. And this was another instance, just like the Medusa thing, just like basically every other scene where they fought a monster in the original thing. Instead of doing the actual thing where Grover and Annabeth are like in danger and like going to die and they're being stretched out, instead of like that dramatic, suspenseful, tension-filled action sequence where he like uses his mind and does that same thing I was talking about, where he be's clever and takes advantage of the environment to defeat the bad guy and tricks Procrustes into going on the bed. They just have this talk back and forth between Percy and the bad guy. Okay, why does Percy have 4 pearls? This felt like just a huge middle finger to the original source material, because it felt like they were like, oh, it didn't make sense why Percy had 3 pearls, so we're just going to give him 4 and then Grover loses 1. Percy having 3 pearls in the original book makes you wonder about Poseidon's motives, like why didn't he give him 4? And of course later it's revealed that he has to like obey by the rules, and Percy's mom is in Hades' control, and only Hades can let people free from the underworld. But in the moment, you're like, oh, we don't know which of the gods are good and why they're doing what they're doing. But in this, is just, Poseidon is just a good guy. He will always help you. He's always on the good side. There are other bads that are God, but Poseidon, he's good. And then, okay, I'm a homeschooler, right? The part where they were like, the flashback thing where, well, maybe you should consider homeschool. And she's like, homeschool? And I'm, dude, what's wrong with homeschool? When they go down into the underworld, why is Asphodel just like a creepy horror scene with like, where there's the jump scare and then there's a forest with mummies that are turning into trees? I was looking forward to seeing the wheat field in Kansas, as that was actually one of the most vivid descriptions in the books of just like endless boring and being bored out of your mind and just feeling nothing, of that being like what happens to the normal people in the world. And Asphodel is supposed to be boring, not like torture where you're being like turned into a tree. And then when Percy's trying to free Annabeth because she had a regret, whatever that was, this is just a nitpick, but why doesn't he use his sword? Like he's like tugging at the roots with like his hands, but he has a sword. And usually this isn't the kind of thing that bothers me, but in this it just bothers me. Why is Tartarus in the desert? It's like a harsh, glaring sunlight, and they're like in the desert. It feels like they kind of switched like the lighting and stuff of Asphodel and Tartarus, because Tartarus is supposed to be the dark, gloomy space with like this ominous cavern that like emanates blackness. But in this, it just looks like a giant hole in a desert. Why, even in the flashbacks of Percy as like a very young child, he's so angry. Like he's supposed to be sarcastic and lighthearted, but in this, he seems almost like emo. Another god that they did so dirty, who in the later books is like such a relatable character, is in this, instead of being like the brooding kind of like another god who's bitter, common theme here, jealous of his siblings and dislikes them, and so kind of lashes out because of that, he's just this annoying, quirky dude. Hades is supposed to be intimidating. This guy that we're talking to is just annoying. Like in the books, it describes him as he's 10 feet tall. He's like wreathed in blackness. He looks like a terrorist. He is the first god who truly looks like a god that Percy has seen. And he's like awe-inspiring and terrifying, but in this he's just annoying. And then what I wonder is another thing where how in the later seasons are they going to make this character relatable? And especially Nico relatable. Because Nico and his kind of character is just a model for Hades' character, and that's why Nico is able to convince him in the last book to go help the Olympians. But how are we going to have that if Hades is this way and he's just perky and annoying? How are we going to have that kind of characterization with him and Nico, who's a very important character? Okay, this is another nitpick, but Poseidon's design, and a lot of the designs too, like Hephaestus and a lot of the other characters, Ares was the only one who really had like a cool design that matched his character. But a lot of the gods, they didn't have designs that like match their theme. Like Poseidon, he doesn't really look oceany. I mean, I guess he has like shorts and a little necklace thing, which is oceany. And then Hephaestus, he doesn't look like he works in a shop. He looks like a well-off posh businessman or something. Like he doesn't look like he has grease all over him, like he makes machines or anything. Okay, this might have just been me, but when they're doing like the war games and stuff, It looks like most of the Half-Bloods have gladiuses, and that's just weird. Like they're Greek, not Roman. That was another nitpick. The Ares fight off show scene was so bad. Instead of having Percy be smart to defeat Ares and taking advantage of Ares' stupidity and using his powers as the son of Poseidon to his advantage, he just falls down, stands up, has a dramatic one-liner. Oh, so cool, man, I'm just frothing at the mouth. This is so amazing. You've improved the book tenfold. And then there's a huge wave that smacks Ares. And it's like, wow, that was so much cooler than the book. Dramatic one-liners and waves are cooler than a character using their brain to be a more powerful but stupider character. That, just who cares about characterization? We want cool sequences of like dramatic one-liners and waves. There's no curse. Ares never curses Percy in this. How are you going to do the Titan's curse? How are you going to do the battle sequence at the end of the third book, the Titan's curse, if Ares hasn't cursed Percy so that he can't fight? Why is Percy going to hold up the sky and whatnot? Okay, this was the single most hilarious moment in the whole show. The scene where it pans around like the center of Olympus where Zeus is, and it shows all the seats. And then it shows the hearth, and it's just a little stone pedestal with like some fire on it. Like, there are seats, then the other seats all look the same. Right, they all just look like bare stone, which don't have any of their character from the books, but whatever. And then there's the hearth right there instead of a seat. It's so obviously like a foreshadowing thing. I feel like it's the writers and directors being like, oh, you see guys, look at that. It's the hearth thing. You know the thing that happens in the later books? See, we're including that because we're being smart and we're including that. Don't you think we're so smart? And I mean, it's obvious that a god is supposed to be there. Like, there's not going to be there's this forgotten Hestia, she gave up her glory to save the world. No. The whole point is the hearth is like a homey fireplace. But in this, it's just a stark fire pit in a chair surrounded by stone. And another thing is, the whole point is that Hestia gave up her seat. If the hearth is in a row there with all the chairs, and she's still meeting with the Olympians, what did she give up? Why should Percy be motivated by her example to give up the glory to Luke at the end? Another thing is, in this, like I've been saying for a while now, all the gods were just 100% evil or 100% mean, and this, Zeus, is just pure evil. He is just the evil authority figure who wants to kill our main character and is just super mean and wants to go to war. Whereas in the books, in the first book, you have to make him not seem too bad, because then later, when we have Thalia, he likes her, and we're shown, the reason Poseidon seems so nice is because he's Percy's dad, and so he favors him. And Zeus favors Thalia. The gods love their children, which makes us like all the gods, but Zeus especially, because we see that he has a good side to him. Another thing is, when Poseidon and Zeus are talking in ancient Greek, and then after that, Percy's like, I cut patros. Like, that's a Greek word. I actually learned, my mother taught me ancient Greek. He's a demigod. If his mother was teaching him ancient Greek when he was a little kid, he should already be, like, fluent in Greek by now, in ancient Greek, because he's a demigod. That's the way it works in the books. And I mean, obviously they just changed this in the adaptation, but yeah. Another thing, the pine tree on Cap Half-Blood looks so weird. I mean, is it supposed to look like a person? Because I feel like it is too, or maybe it's just a really ugly tree that they chose to use for some reason. Either way, I don't like it. It just looks weird. Another thing is, Luke seems way more dangerous, at least to me, if he lures out Percy in the middle of the night, tempts him with some sodas, and then just brutally attempts to kill him. Gives him a very short monologue, but then attempts to kill him. But in the show, he takes him out for this thing where he's probably trying to do the same thing of seduce him to his side or something. But then Percy just figures it out. Then Percy has this long monologue. Then Luke has this long monologue. Then they're monologuing back and forth. And again, it's the same problem of there's no tension. There's no action. It just feels like there's just people talking back and forth about their opposing ideologies. That was never what Percy Jackson was about. This wasn't a philosophical series. No, it's character driven. And that's where they failed. They failed in the character department, and then they also failed in this. Anyway, almost every single tense, action-packed moment in the books was replaced by just the good guys and the bad guys, like, talking to each other. Why in the freaking heck does Backbiter have teleportation powers? This is just so world-breaking. Like, later in the series, in later seasons, we're just going to be like, oh, well, Luke could have just won there if he just teleported with Backbiter. It's one of those things like mind control or time travel, where once you add it in, you're going to be wondering every single moment, why didn't they just do it then? Why didn't they just do it then? And it's going to make Luke so overpowered. And it reminds me of, like, the telekinesis, where Echidna and Percy both used telekinesis, where it's like, okay, when Percy's fighting Luke, and then Percy slashes Luke across the chest, then he says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. So bad. Like, I'm almost screaming and I'm almost laughing at the same time. It's that bad. It makes no sense. Luke was trying to kill him, and he had already decided to oppose him. And he didn't even, like, kill him. He just, like, scratched him a little bit. This was just, I don't know, I mean, I guess it was just bad writing or something. I don't know, it's just, that made no sense even in the context of the show. Just, like, that was horrible. That should not have existed. It made no sense. Again, it was just an excuse for the characters to, like, talk back and forth a little bit. Because then Luke gets the upper hand, and then he's, like, talking to Percy again. Okay, and the final thing that kind of sums up how they watered down the show is at the very end, when they've already beaten the bad guys at the very last episode, Dionysus says, wait, your name is Percy? And it's just a total break of character, first of all. And, like, in the later seasons, they're just never going to have him call him Peter Johnson. He's just going to call him Percy now. And then I realized why they have that. It's so that later we can go to pan to a shot of a zoom in on Walker Scobell's face as he says, my name is Percy Jackson. Like, that, they literally had it just for, like, a cinematic cool thing. And that's just the general vibe of the show, is they replaced all the heart and all the character of the original show with just generic, like, cool, supposed to be cool shots that really aren't cool at all, and just supposed to be cool tropes of characters that aren't cool at all, and just, like, a bunch of generic stuff. If I had to describe it in the best way, I would say how they created Percy Jackson is they read a summary of the plot of the first book, and, like, some of the later books, because there's some details they've obviously put in for the later books, but they read the general plot, and then they just took, okay, we have this trope that's just waiting, we have this, a cool shot that we think would be cool, let's just use this plot to just stuff these in places, because that would make it interesting. And then in the end credits scene, first, it's way more impactful if Sally Jackson purposefully kills Gabe with the head, and that's part of, like, Percy's thing, and it foreshadows how later he has to let Luke make the decision and not take the glory, and let his mom do it. It's way more meaningful if Sally purposely kills Gabe, because it's, like, her choosing to stand up to him. But obviously, in this show, they just wanted to shy away from that, and they're like, oh, we can't have an abusive husband. Oh, we can't have the wife killing that abusive husband because we don't want to deal with those themes. But we will have intense monologues where people are talking about their crap, because that obviously makes it more mature and cool. Okay, and second of all, why were the gods trying to kill Percy? Like, it's Return to Sender, it has the Medusa head in it, and, like, you know, Gabe obviously dies because he opens it up, looks at it, but, like, if the gods had sent that back to Percy, they were full-on intending to kill him, because he would have opened it up and looked at it, and he would have turned to stone and be dead. And that just makes no sense. Okay, thanks for watching this video. I mean, this was very ranty, but that's kind of my sentiments. I just had to get it all out because I took a lot of notes while watching it, and there were just a lot of things that I needed to talk about and get off my chest. I appreciate you watching this. Like and subscribe. I'll hopefully have another video coming out soon, I believe, and bye.